Why don't we go ahead and, can we start if we don't have three here, Sharon?
Are you taking any action?
No.
No, then you can,
Okay.
you only need action before.
And John Matthias will be here, so we don't have a quorum. And again, Kimberly Davis cannot be here. She has responsibility at her school. So, I have two cards here for public comment. Are there any other people that want to give public comment? All right, so Wendy Winston, if you'd like to come up. And I think the name where you're from.
I'm Wendy Winston, and I live in Grand Rapids. I am also a teacher in Grand Rapids Public Schools. I just wanted to mention a few issues that some of the educators in Grand Rapids have with the evaluation system that we're currently using. I could say a lot of things, but I'm going to try to keep my comments to overarching issues. First of all, I would say that the evaluation process is not user-friendly or transparent. I am a mathematician, and I always have a lot of questions about how the ratings are calculated. I use the evaluation handbook and read through it. When I do ask questions, I usually get non-answers. For example, I was working with a new teacher this year, and she teaches several different content areas. So I inquired what rubric would she be rated using, and I never got an actual response that said what rubric she would be using. I used her name, and the responses were usually, well, it depends on which course she teaches the most students in. But clarifying questions never led to, we still don't know what rubric she's being rated on. So it was difficult for me to help mentor her when I didn't really know how to explain her evaluation would be very different depending on which one of those categories she was in because of what she teaches. I will also say that the evaluation process is not collaborative or formative. So if you are in education, formative assessments are assessments that you learn and grow from, and they also provide feedback to the instructor so that the instructor knows what areas you're struggling in and what areas you're doing well in. So the evaluation process is more summative. Even if you have several observations throughout the school year, I don't feel like very many educators are given the support that they need to improve in areas that they weren't highly effective in. And because it's so few observations over such a short time period, 45 minutes, 2 times a year if you're a tenured teacher. So that's a snapshot of the teaching and learning that's occurring in that classroom. The evaluators who are trained in the process are trained that the scores are non-negotiable. So if I sit down for a post-observation meeting with my evaluator, and I can clarify an area that perhaps in that snapshot of time when they were sitting in my classroom for 45 minutes, they didn't know what I had done the day before or the 5 minutes before or what I'm planning to do after that. When they actually completed the rating in the post-observation meeting, I can discuss that with them, but they're not allowed to change the rating after they get clarification. And I've heard that from a couple different evaluators. I'm not sure if every evaluator follows that, but that is what I've been told. I've also heard of teachers, and this goes along with not getting support if you're found to be struggling, minimally effective or ineffective. Teachers have been moved content areas, grade levels, buildings in the middle of the school year and then their rating comes in minimally effective or ineffective, and they're not given a mentor or extra training or additional supports that they might need in order to improve. Basically, they're just told that they're not doing well and they don't really know how to get better. And I'm guessing that at least one other public comment will address this, but the rubrics, the student growth portion of the rubrics is based on reading and math for almost everyone. Now, I'm a math teacher, so mine is based on just math, but if you're a PE teacher or a Spanish teacher or a language arts teacher, your rating is based on reading or reading and math. Sometimes it's classroom, sometimes it's building-wide, and some people are rated district-wide. So they will be evaluated based on the scores of students that they have never met, that have never stepped in their building or in their classroom. Some of these points have come from other people. They asked me to bring these up to the board. Because I'm a math teacher, this isn't something that I thought about as much, but other districts use district common assessments as part of their student growth scores. Grand Rapids, our student growth scores are based on SAT and NWEA MAP mostly. There's a few rubrics that don't use that, but we could also use district common assessments as part of that student growth score. So I think that I feel like those would be more valid than the nationally normed standardized tests, at least to use all of our scores based on nationally normed standardized tests. If you know anything about poverty and standardized tests, students of color, language learners, all of those students, there's implicit bias in some of those tests. With the evaluation process, the burden of proof rests on the educator. The educator has to verify that the data is correct and that the correct data was used. And it's very difficult to do that. If the timelines aren't followed, the educator must provide evidence, and they have to do that in an appeal. There's not really a great way to bring up that issue. And there's no consequence or penalty to the district or the evaluator if the evaluation process is not followed or if it's just not working. Student attendance isn't considered in the evaluation process. My students' test scores are calculated whether they're in my class every day or not. And educator attendance is considered in the overall evaluation, but I know that a lot of educators are pulled out of their classrooms to chaperone field trips, proctor those standardized tests. Extra students might be added to their classrooms, and none of those things are considered in their evaluation rating. It's very difficult to move your students forward if you're pulled out of your classroom once a week to do other things. That's all I have to say.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Apologize for being late.
Jane Neiman.
Hi, I'm Jane Neiman, teach French at Union High School. I've been working in the district for about 13 years now, and before that I taught 11 years at college. I'm a French teacher. Wendy hit a lot of the things I was going to say, so I'm not going to repeat so much. One of the big things is what data is used to evaluate teachers. For example, I would say that in a given year, I teach about 10% of the kids. I have about 10% of our student population in my room. Over the course of 4 years, maybe I get to impact directly about 30% of our population, and yet my scores are based on building scores. And then I teach French, so their English and their math and everything that's the data that's used. Do I make an impact in English? I would say yes, indirectly, because we do a lot of English-French comparison in my classes, but yet I don't always have a direct impact. We do have a lit plan at Union High School, and so I do articles of the week, and I also do Tier 2 vocabulary as we have been instructed in our building, and it's an initiative that I support highly. But then again, that isn't the main part of my instruction, and so to be evaluated on something that I don't have a direct role in is very difficult to accept. It would be nice, as Wendy suggested, to have district assessments be part of that evaluation data, so that at least in part, we could be evaluated based on data that is a direct effect of our actual teaching. I would also like to add about the summative value and the lack of formative feedback. I think Wendy's very right there, and I think that a lot of people, a lot of teachers in my building and other teachers I've talked to would agree with that statement. If we want our teachers, young, old, whatever, to grow and continue to be better educators and learn new things and grow, whether it be in classroom management or instruction or planning or environment, whatever the case may be, I think that it's important to have professional development that works towards that there's mentoring, that the evaluator is giving suggested feedback. I feel like every time I have a post-op, I have to argue for a highly effective in any category, and struggling to do that. Wondering if the data this year student data is not gonna show enough growth and then decrease my score from effective to minimally effective. So it's very stressful. It's very frustrating. And I try to take an active role in helping to plan PD and to implement that. I go to conferences in my content area and in instructional technology to try to improve my instruction. When we got the Chromebooks, I started going to McCall every year and learning how to better implement those in my subject area in my classroom. And so those are the kind of things that I feel like we need to do, and I feel that evaluators, I've had the same evaluator for 7 out of my 9 years in my building, and I feel like we're just now getting to a point where she actually sees some of the value that I bring. That shouldn't take 7 years. As Wendy said, they're in my classroom twice a year. That's about 2 1,000ths of the time I'm in the classroom throughout the year. It is a very small snapshot of what I do daily, and I want it to be equitable too. We have special ed teachers in our building who are push-ins, and the rubric doesn't really fit what they do. So I would encourage the board to consider evaluation tools that can be modified to different disciplines and different types of teaching jobs that we have in the district, so that it is more fair and equitable for all of our educators.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
May I ask one question?
It's really, I think that we're not, yeah, so.
I can ask
mean,
the
but-
next person.
Yeah. We do have an instructional council, yeah.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Milonga Carambola, and I'm the chair of the council this year. We'll bring you an update for our work that we've done since we last spoke. The council met on April 25th, and it's a pretty full day of work for the council. We reviewed 4 new courses that were being proposed to run as pilots for the coming school year in the 2019-2020 school year. And the courses that we looked at, 2 came from the museum school, or museum high school. The first course we looked at and discussed in length was the proposed musical theater course, which the students will be involved in creating and writing dramas, tying it to the cross-content topics they're studying, and using that to progress into their musical experience in high school courses. That course also is proposed and used for other middle schools as well. So it's a progression museum school focused, but also across the district as a course. The second course that was presented was the curation course. Now this course, again, is part of the 10th grade offering for our museum school students, really ties our theme of the museum school into the coursework. Students will be working with the museum curators to curate exhibits, looking at objects they study from our artifacts, and learn through the museum processes how to tell a story and express ideas through the artifacts that they're going to be studying.
What's the name of that one? I'm sorry, I missed that name.
It's a curation. Yeah,
Okay. Got
it's a
it.
curation course.
Did we get any information on? Did you give us any information other than a notice on our?
I'm not sure. Board should probably received a update from the council, but if not, we can provide it. I have copies for you to.
Do we usually see the actual work of the instructional council?
Usually we see some kind of update like that
Description
where
of the
they
class or
hand us.
We've done it both ways, actually, and we'd be more than happy to do that. We can actually do that right now if you like.
Sure, that'd be great.
So you can have a summary yes, we have a summary of the work. I know for sure the notes and minutes, the work session is not, I don't have to share all the detailed conversation,
Yeah.
but
No.
Right.
I give an overview of what we accomplished that day. So this was a full day session as opposed to our 2-hour sessions that we do monthly because we had a lot of topics to look at, review, and discuss. Also, in addition to the 2 courses I just mentioned from the museum school, the fine arts department brought 2 courses that were proposed for pilots in the coming school year. One course, which is for high school, is a high school visual arts foundation course. And this course will be a precursor or a prerequisite to the high school arts course that students will be taking. So it kind of replaces our current Arts 1 course because students need foundations to get into the intricacies or the art class that they are taking. So this course was a proposed replacement, but also a pilot for the coming school year. And that will be across all high schools in the district.
All high schools.
Yes. And in addition to that, a middle school visual arts foundation course was proposed as well to help serve as a stepping stone for middle school students who go into high school and take art classes as a first-year freshman course. So the nuance is that because we have high school Art 1 as a course now, but it's not really preparing students to progress in the art as it is offered. So it's being reimagined and reconfigured to meet the need of our students.
So next year then, all of the kids who finish 8th and go into 9th will be taking visual arts
Foundations,
foundations,
yes.
and that prepares them for the rest of the art classes?
Correct. There will be the stepping stone for the Art 2 and beyond. And in knowing that, I know we have, again, there's a full day, so I'm going to give you, again, the overview of the course that we reviewed and the council heard from the presenters, and it was pretty well supported. Unanimously supported that this course can run as a pilot, but knowing that every year, every pilot comes back to the council for an update as to how did the course go, how we're progressing in the pilot that we are proposing. Also, this day was also full of updates on the courses that were proposed the prior year. So last year, several courses were brought to the council as pilots. So those classes came back to the council as updates as to how the first year of learning happened in the building. Among the courses were a course from the Academy of Teaching and Learning from Central, came to share how students are experiencing the course this year. Lots of highlights, very, very high points. The students are excited about learning to be teachers. They are engaged with the field experience work, with their lower grades in elementary and middle school students, and they're seeing a lot of value in behind the scenes of how it is to be a teacher. So it's pretty exciting in that.
It is.
And we highlighted our partnership with Ferris. Again, that is being worked as it is, but it's going well in the work that's being done right now. A couple more things I want to highlight before we move on. I know time is short. We have a full agenda. I just want to highlight one thing that I think that the council really felt moved about hearing an update from all the work that has been done in the fine arts. I mean, music courses, again, in the past we had some troubles how to get the courses rebuilt from our decisions, but those courses have been back to life and they are very much thriving under the leadership of Ms. Maggie Malone. it's incredible to hear the work's being done there. And then also the course at City High School, we had one IB course update. It's IB Environmental Science course. Again, students wrote feedback to the teacher about the course, how they're experiencing it. I very hear that students have not been in nature and experienced nature as they have in this course. Very grounding work that they are being helped to be stewards of the environment. And it's pretty powerful to hear the students like feedback and their reflections on the work in the class. So the work of the council continues. Really, and we appreciate your ears and listening what is being done. Go to classroom and see what's being done in classrooms. It's pretty amazing what people have brought to the table and shared.
So those classes that were pilot classes last year, the IB class and the other one you mentioned, those classes are now going to be in the teacher.
Teacher Learning Academy?
Yeah, right. So those classes will be offered again, and they will be a part of our curriculum from now on.
Absolutely. Okay. So I think, as the students give feedback, we tweak the syllabi and get better at what we do. Okay. I think the first year you can find out, are we really doing what we said we're going to do, and how did that work out? So now these courses have been part of our offering for our students. For example, the IB course grew from 22 students in the first part of the year to 32 by end of this year. And now it's slotted to have over 90 students taking that class with so much popularity has grown that we have 90 students in the course next year. So
That's good.
year one brought a lot of excitement about what we're doing.
So, Dr. Baker, I first like to thank Dr. Carambola, and since we have teachers in the audience, we have many dedicated teachers that are supporting this process. And they've really had an excellent year as a council this year. But we had such a long meeting agenda this time, we kind of maybe wrongly so.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I agree because we do have a lot to get
So
through
we
tonight.
will
Yeah.
make sure that you get those notes in your
Okay.
boxes by tomorrow morning,
Okay.
and then you can read them in detail.
Well, plus it's really good news.
So thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate the minutes.
Okay. Thanks.
I have a question. May I ask one question, Dr. Evans? When kids are in high school, do they really have much time to take extracurriculars? Because just looking at my own granddaughter, if she's going to take a language and her math and, all of those things, how do you fit in? Like, you really couldn't be in the band and the choir, could you? There wouldn't be enough hours in the day. No.
The Michigan merit curriculum is probably one of the most rigorous in the country, and it does limit the amount of time. that
Looks
kids-
like there might be 1 hour.
It expands as they get older. Yeah.
But we can get you the exact
Okay,
amount.
no, that's all right.
It is
It
very
does.
limited.
Okay, because I know next year she's going in as a freshman, and, she has 1 hour.
She'll get more.
Get more as she gets older, okay.
Unless she doesn't pass all the
Well,
classes.
I hope that's
She
not,
has to take some over again.
let's hope.
All right, so Ms. Pitts, can you explain how we're going to do this?
Yeah,
Kind of
so-
just not just
Good
today, but over
afternoon.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to need some help from you to explain
Okay.
the overtime, but let me just say that, interestingly enough, as a result of some conversation at the entire board table around the Danielson evaluation instrument, I had begun a conversation with David Steik, excuse me, and who introduced us to Kyle McQueen around looking at our evaluation tool. I'm not talking about the system right now, I'm talking about the tools, and asked him, since David was involved with it, at least since I've been here, and in terms of crafting our evaluation system, I thought that he would be uniquely situated to give us some advice about that then we could present to the entire board. Well, then I got the request from the academic committee to talk about the evaluation system, and I asked, since we had already had this, since I had this sort of in the works, that once they finished their evaluation, if we could, I could present that information to you all first. I had also asked Eric Harmson, who was here and who will be back, to kind of put together a summary of the system and some data as a result of a request of one of our board members. Dr. Flores. And it had come up in our evaluation, in our policy committee meeting. So these things are kind of intertwined or intermixed, and I'm not sure, but I'm going to spread the information wide and far. So what we have present today and what the additional information, and I don't know whether we'll have time to talk about that or we can talk about that at the next time, depending on what you want. I would be sharing that with the other board members too, since they had asked, especially Dr. Flores had asked that for me. So,
Right, I guess that's a different conversation.
yeah, so I'm not quite sure exactly what the long-term plan is, but we are happy to facilitate whatever the process that you would like. I have another process going along the policy line,
Okay.
so I'm
So when do
feeling
you,
a little misdirected.
when would we first expect a new evaluation system to be implemented? Would that be perhaps a year from now?
Oh, it depends on whether or not you're talking about changing the tool. If you're talking about changing the tool, I'd say it'd probably be more than a year from now.
Okay. And
Because
that's a decision that we'll have to make.
yeah, that's a decision that you're trying to make. Now, the system, sort of how we tweak around the edges, what's included in the system in addition to the tools and meeting the state guidelines, that's easier to amend
Okay.
and be fluid with.
Now, when they say 25% for the teacher's evaluation, which I understand they're going back to for this year, so that's 25% of all the kids in a building for their reading and math scores only?
Well, it's a little bit more complicated, and I would like to have
Yeah, let's
that
kind of
whole-
go, I think that
yeah.
the way I see this is
Yeah.
that this is chunks. So just,
Yeah.
when we started, I met David years and years ago.
Right.
So, and we spent a lot of time, and I'm probably, I don't know, maybe John was around. I don't know if you were around when we worked with.
I don't think
Grace.
so, because
So I think
he
I'm the
came
only
after me.
board member
Yeah.
around, maybe Raynard Ross. And that now we don't have a board that can take ownership of the evaluation system. And if you talk to teachers outside of the boardroom, that's the first thing they want to talk about is evaluation system. Well, there's other
Always.
things that they want to talk about too, but certainly that seems like something, and we can't really even own that system because none of us really knows why it was. So I think that taking this in chunks that are manageable and moving through, so going through just the differences of the tools, and that's all we'll do today.
Okay, that'd
And then
be
I know
fine.
that I need to sit down with you, and we weren't able, with our schedules over the last couple of weeks, to figure out a timeline.
Okay, very good. And then perhaps at the next meeting, then we can talk about the data that I have, and we can share that with you ahead of time. And then we would have Steve Petros here. We would have to talk a little bit more to answer some of those other questions. So after we figure out, or you discuss what you want, then we can have we can present that to the committee.
And we should discuss, and maybe I want to bring President Grant into the conversation because it would determine what we do determines a lot. So if we want to.
But are you suggesting that we change the tool? I mean,
No, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm suggesting that we're going to learn about what the tools are and that if
Other
we.
ones besides the one that we're using?
No, even the one
Even
that
though,
we're
I don't think that people on the board know the current one. And so, I mean, as a whole board, in terms of understanding the current one, and certainly, and how it's implemented is a whole other thing. So you said that there's the tools and then there's the systems,
correct.
and so those are two different things, and we're not going to try to do both today.
Okay,
We're
that's
going to go
fine.
to the tools, but yeah, we got to. But if we do change, then it's going to extend the timeline, which means that we need to take that into consideration if that's what the district wants to
And
do.
it would have financial implications too, so you'd have
Yeah.
budgetary, implications around that also. So so it would be,
There would be no contractual,
No.
This is just, so
No.
that the board would decide what tool was going to be used and that would be it.
yes,
Yeah, within the guidelines of what's
Yeah,
approved by the state.
and also.
within the
state.
four, yes, obviously within the, and if we were, if we wanted to, which I definitely do not suggest that we do, we could come up with our own, but that would be a nightmare. So validating the whole 9 yards. So the state has given us 4 tools that they have vetted, and these are the ones that Mr. Stite and Mr. McQueen will discuss today and talk about the strengths and the weaknesses of the tools. And then later we can, at maybe the next meeting or whatever, if you decide, we can talk about why we chose the Danielson over another or whatever. And then we have some additional information regarding the current system that we're using and why certain things are done the way that they are. And then we can move from there with whatever additional information you want.
I just kind of go back to this concern that I have for the teachers. Where are they going to fit into helping us decide? I think this probably impacts them more than anyone else. And
I have a feeling that they'll let us know. Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of this process, and that was included.
Yeah.
I mean, so anyway.
And we
I
do
think that
meet
we'll
with
know
the
a lot more,
union
so.
president, Ms. Bowens,
Yeah.
to get it's not, we get their feedback through Ms. Bowens. And then we do meet with selective other teachers, which we can talk about more in detail at the next meeting or the next opportunity that you want us to talk about it.
And the evaluation system that we currently have was put into place under new state and federal. It was a lot. I mean, it was just
Yes.
all kinds of politics and
Yes.
having to understand what it was. So today we're just
Right.
focusing on an introduction to these 4 tools.
Yes, that is our
And that's
intent
all we're
today. That's all
focusing on, and we're not
today.
making decisions or debating which ones. So, but
Exactly.
we're just which of it, and ultimately, as our public comment was suggesting, we want to find a tool that helps teachers improve their instruction. So.
Well, and I would also say that no matter what tool you have, tool has to be implemented with fidelity. And the process around a lot of the things, the supports, et cetera, those are not tool-driven. Those are people-driven. So,
Right.
That's why I try to separate that a little bit. Okay?
Okay.
All right, and so I'd like to introduce or bring up for them to introduce themselves, David Stites and Kyle. Thank you.
Good afternoon, board. It's, I think it was probably 6-7 years ago since I was last in front of you guys talking about teacher evaluation stuff, so it's a pleasure to be back here.
Well, hopefully it's not 7 years again.
Yeah.
And if so, I'm not here.
Right. So I want to say, we're with Basis Policy Research. We work quite a bit in the state of Michigan and West Michigan, as well as nationally on, used to be K-12, now it's more pre-K through 16 research projects. And we've been working with the Grand Rapids Public Schools for probably 9 years in different capacities, conducting research on different things related to their school performance and teacher evaluation system, as well as out-of-school time programs. So we're happy to be here. I have worked nationally on teacher evaluation, teacher effectiveness stuff for quite a while. We, as a research institution, kind of go where the wind blows and where policies are important. And starting in 2012, teacher evaluation became a huge issue across states. The state of Michigan passed new legislation that requires teachers to be evaluated and assigned a rating as ineffective, minimally effective, effective, or highly effective. And those ratings have stakes attached to them in terms of teachers' jobs. So we have some context to this work, and today, as was mentioned, we're going to talk about the 4. My colleague Kyle McQueen is going to talk about the 4 classroom observation rubrics, what we've been referring to as tools, that the state has approved. And now I should say I was part of the peer review process of the states, the committees, the Michigan Council of Educator Evaluation, that for the report that they put out with these 4 recommended tools and a recommended system. I was on that peer review process, so I was very familiar with sort of how they reached those decisions. So Kyle's going to talk through them. I do want to reiterate, though, in the start what Sharon said, and also I think addresses some of the concerns that teachers may have, is it may not necessarily be the content of the tools, as Kyle's going to show. They're all very similar in terms of what they measure, in terms of instruction and instructional practice, and how they measure it. but more of how well are they implemented, so that teachers do get that formative feedback throughout the process and they aren't surprised at their final results, and that there's good dialogue going on between them and their principals or whoever else is conducting classroom observations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kyle.
Thank you. So in our analysis of the 4 observation tools, as well as the kind of supporting research behind it, just a couple high-level takeaways that I want to address first before I get into the kind of details of the specific tools. One is all 4 of the state-approved observation tools, which are the Danielson's framework for teaching, the Marzano teacher evaluation method or model, the 5D instrument, as well as the thoughtful classroom instrument. So those are the 4 state-approved tools. They are all based on an extensive body of theoretical and empirical literature. All 4 also recommend similar observation processes, and by processes I mean they recommend a similar number of full lesson observations and informal walkthroughs, and those would also, for the formal observations, that would include a pre-conference and a post-observation conference. And then also all 4 are reliable and valid instruments. The most extensive, I do want to call it the most extensive local pilot study, the University of Michigan's Institute of Social Research did a study kind of in tandem with the Michigan Council of Educator Effectiveness in 2012 that piloted the 4 observation or the instruments, tools across several different districts in the state of Michigan. And that study found, or basically they strongly recommend the Danielson's framework for teaching. They also recommend the 5D and the thoughtful classroom. They just recommended that with less enthusiasm. And I believe we have a more detailed report that we shared with Sharon and Eric that I know can be provided to you all that lists more of the details of each of that particular study.
Can I jump into this real quick? When we talk about whether or not the tools are reliable in terms of classroom observations, what's most important is that after whoever the evaluators are trained, conceptually, 2 evaluators should be able to walk in and observe the same lesson and walk out and assign the same ratings on the tool, so that there's agreement over how teachers are rated. And so that's sort of, we can test that, and monitor that. All of these tools will have a reliability if there's proper training of the evaluators in place.
In terms of each tool, so moving from left to right, we have the 4 different approved tools. These are, so if we're looking at Danielson, those are the 4 domains that the tool examines or seeks to measure in the classroom. And what we can see here is that 2 things. One is that the 3 other tools in comparison to Danielson all are measuring pretty much the same domains and constructs. They just have slightly different names. The one primary difference is that the 5D further delineates instruction into 3 categories of student engagement, curriculum and pedagogy, and assessment for student learning. So the idea here is that they're all very similar and are measuring the same constructs, just named slightly different. This provides a little bit more detail about each of the 4 tools, and I just want to, for your all's reference, the board, Appendix A, which is page 8 and 9 in the handout that I provided for you, provides just a list of the components that the Danielson framework for teaching and the 5D include, in case you want to go a little bit deeper in terms of what comprises each tool. So two main points that I want to make here is that the main difference across the 4 tools is the number of components that each includes in each respective tool. So it ranges from 10 for the thoughtful classroom up to the 5D has 30 individual components. Otherwise, they're very similar in terms of the scoring scale that they include. The recommended classroom observations, as I mentioned earlier, includes both full walkthroughs, or full lessons, excuse me, so formal observation as well as shorter informal walkthroughs throughout the year. And they also have very similar recommendations for the vendor training that they provide. So this means that if you were to partner with the Marzano teacher evaluation model, for example, that would be the vendor-specific training that they provide to a district that's onboarding into the process. So they have both on-site and remote training. And each, which is nice, they don't necessarily have a technology requirement in order to implement the tool, but they all have different platforms. So given that these tools are pretty similar, it raises the question for us really just what concern would changing the tool seek to address, and then whether or not changing a tool would ultimately alleviate whatever that concern is. So with that being said, we just have a couple considerations. One is incorporating stakeholder feedback into this process. Most important stakeholders being, in this case, our teachers and our administrators who are the ones implementing this process, learning more about what are their experiences like with the current tool. Do they prefer one tool over the other, and why? Are certain teachers experiencing better experiences with the evaluation process, and where is that occurring? Those are all really important questions to consider. That includes the important stakeholders' voices in this process. And in my research background on teacher evaluation and coaching, I've kind of come to learn that it's not necessarily the tool that drives instructional improvement. It's the process, it's the quality of the conversation that an administrator is having with a teacher, and it's the quality and the amount of support that follows the teachers as they're going through the process. Two other considerations. One would be resources, both time and financial. If you were to move to a new tool, the financial resources that would be associated with that, as well as the time, because time is limited in terms of the amount of training and calibration and kind of capacity building that you would need to focus on if you were to move to a different tool. And then finally, the trade-offs. Moving to a new tool would shift the focus of professional learning from the current instrument and current district priorities to having to learn a new tool. So that's our kind of our summary of the 4 observation tools, and would be happy to answer any questions that you have at the moment.
Yeah, I guess for me, I would want to get more insight both for the Danielson that we're currently using to some of the contextual questions that I would have. So how is it addressing the cross-cultural issues? How do we understand how it's affecting, let's say, the poverty district that we are, meaning how our kids come into our district, and then how are we accounting for that in the training of our teachers in order to be able to contextualize, to teach the PDs that would go behind that, some of those pieces, and I obviously our parents. Mm-hmm. When our parents are understanding that this is how their kid is being taught, I'm sorry, how are they to understand if their kid is not passing, or if our graduation rates aren't being raised, and some of those kinds of things. So I'm wondering how addressing some of those, or having those conversations. I don't know that we've had them really straight up and out, but how do we have those conversations so that we account for how evaluators are being taught, and then how our teachers are being taught those things in order to, that we're looking for, that our district is looking for achievement.
It seems like that is in these rubrics, some of the questions that John was raising in terms of could you maybe, are there a way, maybe these observations, these domains and components, you could address some of that? Because I know that my recollection is that when we went through at least Danielson, that there was an expectation of connecting with the cultural background of the students and creating a learning environment, et cetera.
I can't speak for the other tools, but Danielson does have some of them. So now, I mean, if you think of where those components are listed in the appendix, I think each of those, right, has a rubric with the criteria to achieve, the 4 ratings: unsatisfactory, basic, proficient, distinguished. And so it'll define what specific observable behaviors and sometimes documentation of a plan that address those issues. So I do think that we can follow up to check the other tools, because I think that's a really important point about just if there is a lens for which we might see some differentiation across the tools, it is how well suited they are for the dynamics of your schools and the dynamics of your student population relative to your teacher population in terms of cultural differences. One of the things I think, another lens though, that we should think about though is there may not be like an inherent, they may give good feedback to teachers about how well they're doing for students, working to address those cultural issues. But one of the concerns that we see nationally is teachers who do serve more academically challenged, which typically, is students who are more economically disadvantaged populations, are going to often have systematically lower classroom observation results because they just have often more difficult student background issues to deal with in the classroom. So that's another thing that is more of an implementation consideration, but it is something that we should be thinking about as well. And Danielson does a pretty good job relative, from what I understand, to the other tools of not addressing that issue in terms of what it measures. Because what you don't want to have is these disincentives for your best teachers to work in the schools where they're most needed, and to go to the schools where the student population, for lack of a better term, is just
More advantaged. My question is, how much do you work with teachers when you do all of your research?
Well, the way we work is usually in an evaluative capacity or in a technical assistance. And what we'll do is we conduct focus groups with teachers. Oftentimes, teachers and principals will be part of design sessions to work on improving technical or improving evaluation systems. Some districts will ask us to conduct, district-wide surveys of teachers to ask for specific feedback that then gets reported back to, the evaluation committee or the people who are working on the issue.
So are we thinking that if we kept the Danielson, but we could make our own tweaks to it so that it reflects what's going on here in Grand Rapids rather than in the national?
Yeah, I wouldn't advise modifying the tool itself, right? Because the tool has quite a bit of research behind it, and it's not everything, right? It's not going to capture everything. I wouldn't necessarily change the tool. What I would focus on is, again, the implementation and making sure that when evaluators, there's a level of quality assured to how well the evaluations are conducted, and then how well teachers are getting feedback that then is used to help them set meaningful goals, and then that's aligned to professional development. So in other words, like those to me are, when I look, and this is not every district is having these issues, it's more of making sure it's the process that's laid out with these programs is being done with fidelity across all of your buildings. So, and, all of your teachers are getting really good feedback. And
So it's not so much, what you're suggesting at least, it's not so much the Danielson itself, it's more how it's being used or correctly or incorrectly by the evaluators.
yeah, it's not the content. I mean, since these evaluation systems have become more high stakes, all of these different tools have gone through new iterations to improve their language and been tested to make sure they have good the reliability and validity. They're not perfect, but it's not, in my opinion, in terms of trade-offs, focusing on the content of the tool is not what's most important. It's focusing on the implementation and the supports around the tool, as well as addressing what I think is a larger issue of student growth measures and making sure your teachers in non-core subject areas are getting assessment results that align to what they're teaching.
And that is something that can be fixed?
There's options out there, district-wide common assessments. I don't know how much you want to veer into that conversation, but there is, and I think it's not adopting a new evaluation system. What we see is these are just incrementally improving the existing system and addressing some of those issues.
Let me ask the question this way. Are there school districts that you work with where the feedback from teachers is supportive of any one of these particular? In other words, does Danielson, in other school districts, people are like, yeah, Danielson measures what I wanted to measure, it helps me become a better teacher, and it's fair assessment. Are there some school districts that do it better than others?
I haven't heard anyone ever complain about Danielson, but I also haven't heard anyone complain about, they complain about the process. Oftentimes they complain that there's somebody who may not understand the context of their classroom, who's in their classroom and giving them feedback in sort of but in terms of the actual content of the tools, I don't hear, I can't say I've heard that very much as it relates to Danielson. For districts that have tried to create their own tool, that's oftentimes where you get more of the debate around whether or not we're measuring the right things.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at, actually, is it the tool or is it the implementation? And so how do we end up, so again, we could change a tool and still end up having a system that people don't like, so which gets me to my next question, but go ahead.
In that study that I referenced earlier that the ISR at UM completed in 2013, one component of the feedback that in the teacher survey and the administrator survey was that most of the training that they received was focused on calibrating and scoring the instrument, but that does not necessarily always translate into how do you go about having a conversation about what you just observed. And the feedback was administrators tried to seek out additional support and additional training on how to go about having those conversations.
Well, I think teaching is an art, and the idea that we can put numbers on people, it's totally ridiculous. You can't do that.
But you're getting ready to do that.
I am.
So you're going to have to figure out which of these.
How to swallow it? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think that how do we make it effective? So going to your stakeholder feedback, how do we measure teachers and administrators' experience with this? And I think that would be something that would be really useful. So we have comments from teachers today, just 2 teachers, but I would say that when I hear people talk about evaluation, that tends to be, and I heard it a lot, especially in this last election. I know John did. How do we measure that in a way that can help us do it? And is that something that you guys do?
It is. We do it, for example, we work down in Arizona and the teacher with the state in Maricopa County, and the evaluation system is used by about a third of the teachers in the state. And we do an annual feedback survey to all the teachers and principals that ask them to open-ended and closed sort of questions to rate their satisfaction with the process and offer feedback on what would be improved, and then that gets summarized into a report that leads to recommendations. And so it's an ongoing process. We also conduct focus groups. And, like for an example, if you wanted to get feedback from teachers and principals about the current classroom observation tool and the process, it's really insightful before you take the time and resources to administer a survey to conduct a couple focus groups with teachers and principals.
And those are the kinds of things that you do?
And we do, and then summarize the results, and that kind of can help lead you where to go. And I will say we've got resources to support that work, in the next school year for you guys as well. So
What does that mean?
Yeah.
What did you just say?
Oh, well, so we get support from the Doug and Maria DeVos Foundation to
To do this research.
provide
Okay,
this
so
sort of support.
we might be able to do this without an extra expense.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I see.
That's, sorry, the more clear way.
So you sound like a politician there.
I know, right?
Maybe we'll see that we get you more resources. We'll stop by and bring you flowers on Teachers Day. And so,
I understood that part. I understood that part. The
guess
other part I don't understand.
It sounds like this is a great opportunity for us to take a deep breath and really look at what have we been doing, and then an opportunity for as a district to look at ourselves and our students, and that unique mix that we are, to say how is it either working or not, and then what maybe not working or not, but the components that we really said, given our kids and then our teachers, we see either this lacking or that, and we can supplement it, and vice versa with our kids. We see this lacking, and we see programmatically or other ways that we can begin to address that uniquely or through grants, whatever kinds of ways that might be. We have heard a lot about how the evaluators have been trained in GRPS and how that has either been a plus or a minus. And so again, I'm looking to see how we can either evaluate that or see that honestly, so that we can really make this more our own, or if we choose some other tool, that we at least are going with our eyes open into it, both parties, to see where we go with that. Especially with all of the new things that are happening, new superintendent that may come in, just all those pieces. It just seems like a unique time to be able to use that, and then get teacher feedback. It's important feedback from our stakeholders.
Well,
The most
okay.
important thing is, teachers and administrators, those are the two people. I mean, as much as I care about the kids and the community and everything, the bottom line here is, we want to evaluate our teachers to see whether or not the kids are learning, but we don't want to make the evaluations so impossible that they never show up as highly effective, when that just cannot be the case, because that's all my grandchildren have ever had, is highly effective teachers, as far as I'm concerned. So, I'm not so sure that this is an issue for anyone to be as worried about as we should be worried about, because you all know about how the teachers feel about the evaluation system that we have now. And I don't think, I've been on the board for 2.5 years, and I have not spoken to one teacher yet who said, "Oh, I just love the way they evaluate us." That's far from it. So we have to do what's best for teachers, and then how do we get the administration on board, that they recognize what needs to be done and truly evaluate the important things that teachers do.
And part of the approach to conducting focus groups with stakeholders would also be ensuring on our end the sampling of who is involved in those focus groups is considered, so that it's teachers of all different experience levels, teachers with all different backgrounds, and teaching at different locations throughout the district, to make sure that we're incorporating as much of a representative population of teachers and administrators
That's the thing I think
into our
we need to do
recommendations.
first, is find out what needs to be fixed. How big is the problem? And
Well, I would say that it would be nice to know what is the experience of people who are part of this evaluation process.
right.
So that's what's most important. And all of us agree that it's about not choosing which teachers are highly effective, but helping a teacher become more effective at
Absolutely.
teaching. And that's what everybody wants. And I haven't heard anybody say we shouldn't have evaluation. So I think having a sense of what the experience is important. I think that especially if, in terms of making a decision on a new tool, at this point, it would be just basically us reading a tool, and I don't, it doesn't really seem like it's, and we don't really know what the experience is. So you're right. I mean, yes, some people will be specific and talk about Danielson, but most of the time it's kind of the things that were said earlier, and it wasn't specifically about the tool itself. So, but
The
yeah, we should know.
implementation,
Yeah,
the
it's-
implementation.
So what is the experience of, and I
The
think
people,
that we can talk to the superintendent and see what would it be like to do, you know, an evaluation plan, and have that before we move into making decisions on what the tool should look like. Eventually, I wouldn't mind, because I do remember, I remember being impressed with the breadth of the Danielson. I mean, they addressed the issues that you were talking. I mean, it was pretty exhaustive and exhausting, which I think is some of the is that there's so many different items that
that's-
being and what you get measured on may not be what your strengths are. I mean, I think that there's issues with it, but I do remember it being that it kind of had broken down the process of teaching in a way that if these things were done, but then there's implementation and there's the experience of it and there's the training and the professional development. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into it. I do think it would be useful for us to go through in more detail what teachers are measured on, and maybe even to just go through the tool, you know, sometime.
To get copies of the actual rubrics. And
But
to
I think
see
it makes more sense to have some evaluation done first. That way we know what we're looking at, other than saying, oh, this is a good item. This seems like, I want my teachers, my kid's teacher measured on this, but we don't really know what the experience is. And
I would say, you know, if you were to get feedback from teachers and principals, the issues that were raised today, right, I could have predicted all of them, right? I mean, because they come up across, you know, not just the system. There are things that have just been constant challenges because, you know, all this legislation passed, and it was the tools weren't there, like the systems weren't, nobody had the perfect system. They're reacting to it, but now there are better tools. For example, like with some of these classroom observation tools, there are video banks. So if a teacher gets a low rating on a certain component, they can then go see examples of what highly effective practice looks like for that component, and then that could be linked to professional development. So there's a lot of that stuff that could be addressed.
Do our teachers have access to that?
I don't know if in this system, but the Teachscape software that comes with Danielson does. But so there are a lot of different ways, I think, just to improve the current system, but to address some of these other areas. There's going to be trade-offs, and I think what the results of this sort of inventory or this feedback from teachers and principals could do help you prioritize where resources are invested. Because with the student growth component going up to 40%, and knowing we still have some of these issues where teachers are evaluated based on district-wide results, which there are reasons that's done that aren't, you know, it's not great, but there's reasons that's done.
I'm just curious.
Because they don't exist, because the assessments don't exist for some teachers' areas. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
in a way, using the district-wide average was not meant to imply that teachers like had an impact on the district-wide. It was more just to
Well, isn't
kind of
there,
hold them harmless by putting them at the end.
right, but isn't there a way that it could develop some sort of a rubric for special ed teachers and French teachers and people who teach very specific
Yep.
departments, and there are those rubrics so that we could teach our administrators how to use those things so that teachers would only be,
So some districts have created these student learning objectives, right, where you know, like the math secondary department could get together and come up with not math, like say foreign languages could come up with their own either common assessments or some student learning objectives so that you could get more refinement.
So that's a reasonable alternative
It's
to
a reasonable
NWEA.
alternative, or what I would just say, an enhancement of the
Okay.
current system. You kind of have to take it for all these different groups, and we know that, yeah, there's special education in others. There's new assessments that are coming out that might be more useful early childhood. So all of those things can be considered. I think it's a matter of, if we got the feedback, helping you guys prioritize what's the first priority, and it may not be changing from Danielson
okay,
to a different.
okay. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is get that done.
Well, I'll talk to Ms. Pitts and superintendent about the conversation we've had about having an assessment done. So it seems like that's something that we could do and would be useful. So this was good. I mean, I think that this is good. It looks like it's not going to be quick, but although it seems like if we don't change tools, we could implement things differently more quickly.
I'd say think of it as a 5-year plan to constantly improve. Really, the list of things that were addressed and brought up today, every year, just figuring out which ones are most important to tackle and address.
Well, that's how long she has left on her board service. Is
No,
5 years.
no,
We
no,
can name the evaluation system
not
after you.
sure. Don't count your chickens over there, Tony. I
legacy.
plan to live to be 90, so.
Well, I know. That's what I'm saying. You're going to get reelected, and
That's
5
right.
years from now, you'll be
I'll still be
responsible
here.
for the
I'll still-
plan, and
I
these
see,
teachers
I
will
see.
come by and let you know what they think about it.
Well, one thing, I want them on my side, that's for sure. That's what it's all about, as far as I'm
Look what
concerned.
she brought today.
Yes, yes. That was in my mailbox. It was, went to the mailbox this morning and I knew we were talking about this and I thought, this is karma or something, fortuitous. So.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Appreciate your work. Yeah. Thank you guys for coming and sharing.
Thank you.